Alright, hi everyone. Just want to let you know that I have updated my startup file for Blender 5.0.1. So I'm going to run you through the things that have changed. So there's some script stuff that's been included in here, some render settings changes because I'm doing tests with my render farm at the moment, and some miscellaneous things here and there. If you don't know, I have a resource on Gumroad where I share my startup file and theme, actually. I updated my theme this time. My theme is called Steel. So in the downloads, you'll see Steel 501, which is effectively a darker version of Blender's dark theme, but with more of a slightly blue bias. And things like node colors are a little bit desaturated. So this is my custom theme that I use for everything. If I had my face, you can even see down in the corner here, we've got text with the syntax highlighting active. So it's, nice and green as well. So we'll talk through it. And maybe if you're inspired by some of the changes I've made, you might want to make your own startup file. And of course, if you don't know, you can go to File, Defaults, and then Save Startup File. And whatever file you have active in Blender, it will make that what your Blender opens every time as a brand new file. So one of the things you'll see immediately when we go into rendered mode is that we have a pretty nice lighting setup. So this was added in the last version. Well, there's always been a nice lighting setup, but it's changed a bit over time. The original version of the startup file was like a sort of sample pack for my Afterglow lighting assets. And I originally sold the pack as a way of raising money for medical consultation fees, which is why it's a little bit expensive for a startup file. But over time, different changes have been made to the file. So on Gumroad, the files available are like an archival reference for my startup file as it's changed. This time I was considering getting rid of the lighting setup almost entirely, because now that I've got a render farm going and I'm doing a whole bunch of tests, it's very much project agnostic. So whereas before I was so focused on like diorama type renders, which this would be an example of with a light catcher and a single focus object, becoming more project agnostic means that we don't really need a starting point as such. And really anything we need, we can grab from the asset browser. You might find the layout a bit cluttered as well. So on the left side here, I've got 4 editor windows open. I've always found it easier to close things I don't need rather than open things that I do need, because oftentimes, even though I've used Blender for years, I still have no idea where the editors are whenever I look in this window. For some reason, I just can't get the positions of the editors like saved in my memory, probably because I don't think about it too much. So there's shader, geonodes, and then this is supposed to be a compositor. There we go. And then world nodes. Obviously, shader and world nodes are technically the same editor, but one is set on the world mode and one's set on the object mode. By default, this central object is selected. It's a subdivided cube with one of my favorite materials on it, the physical definition one, which is very reactive to like curvature. So I don't know if I select a couple of these rings here, you'll see that it's reacted to that. Like the convex areas are brighter, the concave areas are darker, etc. And it looks really nice on like sculpted objects. This is quite a complex material, and I've done a previous video on it, but you'll see that there are these 2 invisible objects called distance sub and distance trans. These are also related to this material where the proximity of the geometry says whether that part of the object should be subsurface or transmissive. If you want to learn more about that, there's the Alien Embryo project. If you don't need any of this in the startup file, just straight up delete it. What you'll be left with is a balanced lighting setup in cycles, I should say. So this is not for Eevee. Of course, we're just specifically talking about the lighting setup. But say I brought in like a 3D scan of some kind, which does have the physical definition material on it. Control A, make instances real. You'll see that we've already got a really balanced setup. Like I can just, go ahead and start grabbing renders or modifying the lighting however I like. And we're going to have a nice time doing that. So let me just make those materials local. Obviously, the materials can be edited as well. So let's bring that all back. There's a geometry nodes tree on this object already because it's giving an example of how to get that proximity data to the geometries. Again, this is a very specific effect. Most people probably won't need it in their startup file, but for me, it's there. In the compositing nodes, there's a denoise mix node. This is one that I use a lot. When doing renders, sometimes I like to do denoising, but I don't like to do it 100%. I find it sometimes nice to leave in a little bit of the noise, and typically I go for about 80%, as in 80% denoised, so 20% of the original. I obviously have this unplugged while working in the viewport because you don't want it to be denoising live in the viewport. That's going to really slow it down. Sometimes that catches people out. But when it comes to the final renders, I will plug that in and then use that instead. In the world nodes, I have a node group HDRI and color background. This is going to let you easily separate the background color from an HDRI, which you can plug into the color there. You can also control the strength of the HDRI, and we can also get volume, color, and density as well if you need that. In the render settings, I've set up my kind of default values. to my max samples. I've got it set to optics, even though I oftentimes use open image denoise, but I'll explain why I've got optics set here a bit later. Under the output settings, I've got the output path to be C landing rendering. This is because when I'm doing renders via the render farm on my different worker PCs, they all render locally, and then those frames are taken off computer to a network computer. So I made sure that I've got the actual local location in there. And I've also set up flamenco settings in the flamenco add-on by default. So these values are basically ready to go whenever I make a file and put it on my shared workspace. When it's ready to render on the render farm, it will chunk it up by a size of 6 frames per computer and do it that way. And again, the value is set there. So most of this stuff isn't going to be applicable for most people, but I'm just letting you know about some subtle changes. Let's take a look at the workspaces. So these are not the default ones. These are ones that I've set up, although some of them are similar to the defaults. So this is the 3D view. We've got the compositor. I'm going to hide my face briefly. I like my compositor to look like this, where, we get the single frame, and then we've got the nodes on the lower section. And there's also a slight 3D view here if we need to just preview the camera to see where we are. Maybe I could also add a timeline here, but that's all I've really needed. Then there's the double view. So this one is more for if you're doing social posts and if people want to see a wireframe or a kind of viewport look of the render, then we can do them side by side. That's sometimes interesting for people. Vertical, again, for social posts, I have a vertical monitor on the side. It's just a regular monitor, turned sideways. So it's 9:16 aspect ratio rather than 16:9. So this UI layout looks fine on that monitor, but it looks weird when you see it on a horizontal screen like this. So if I'm doing shorts for social media, then that's what this workspace is for. It'll make it a lot clearer for people. Then we've got the file data tab. When I'm making asset libraries for people, I want to check what data is included in the file and if anything is there that's not supposed to be there, whether it's certain types of linked data or meshes which aren't assigned to objects in the view layer and they need to be deleted, things that have been left as fake user tagged, all that kind of stuff. So this is where I look for that. Then we've got the scripting tab, of which there are extra scripts that have been included in this version. We'll talk a bit more about that in a sec. And then board. So this one is just for annotations, really. If I need to explain something when doing a video, then, this is a nice place to do it. And this is actually just the world nodes, because I figured the world nodes are often the most empty, node tree space. Under the scripting tab, so in the text editor here, there's always been this reference, resolution and frame rate reference, which a lot of people really liked. I'll zoom in a bit. It's just a reference of different resolutions for different purposes. So in case you forget what the regular resolutions are, especially down for things like the square textures for texture painting or what should be ultra wide. Additionally, sometimes the frames per minute calculations are useful because we've got frames per second and then estimated frames per minute. There's also a tiny reference file that I've added this time for sculpting. So this doesn't have much information. It's just sometimes when I hop into Blender and I want to sculpt something, I forget what values I like to start with for dynamic topology. So I just made a note here for myself saying cube, subdiv control 5, material, shade it smooth, dynamic topology, relative detail mode, 5 pixel and subdivide collapse. So it just gives me a little reminder to say, okay, that's where you usually start with it. Then we've got scripts. So like I mentioned about doing tests with my new render farm, I was doing a lot of exporting to different file formats and then converting between the formats that have been exported and doing denoising. Do I do it before? Do I do it after certain stages? Doing the view transform for the color. How do I convert between color spaces, whether it's here or in DaVinci Resolve? And I bumped into a few scripts that were quite useful with the help of ChatGPT when trying to figure out quick little fixes and conversions. Also some help from Blender forums. So first of all, in cycles, you can denoise an animation, as in temporal denoising, even though I'm not entirely sure how this works because we're calling it per frame individually. And if it's temporal, we want to preserve some information between the frames, but I suppose that's also stored in the OpenEXR layers. Basically, if you export files in the multi-layer EXR format, and if you enable the denoise, and I believe it should be vector, either vector or normal layer in the export, then you can run a secret type of denoising in Blender, which is not accessible through the interface, but you have to call it from an operation. And the idea here is that it should be a temporal denoiser, which means that it takes into consideration information through time for the denoising. So the denoising artifacts look less flickery and weird. However, the downside to this is that you don't get a finite control over the value of the denoising, such as what I have with the node group here. So that when you do denoise the frames, sometimes they just look smudgy anyway because it's done 100% denoising. But I've left this in here as a demonstration script because someone might find it useful. Additionally, we've got a method for flattening multi-layer EXRs into single layers, just so it's easier for software like Premiere to read as an image sequence. Not required for most workflows, but again, it was a useful script that just came out of the kind of ChatGPT session when asking it for quick tips on how to do these things. This method of converting between files also does not mess with the regular render settings that you have. And finally, this one is the most useful script for me that I've included in this version of the startup file. It's the linked data checker. So to explain what this does, one thing I noticed when doing tests on my render farm was that sometimes one worker would render the frame correctly and other workers would miss something in the scene. Specifically, ambient occlusion as an effect on a procedural shader was present on one computer but not on the others. And it took a while to try and figure that out, but what I found in the end was that even though the materials on the objects had been made local to the file, in those materials there was a sub-node group that was not local to the file, so it was still linked to one of my other asset libraries. So when that file was moved onto the shared workspace and then duplicated in some way to the computers, that link was broken. So those open instances of Blender couldn't figure out where that node group was or what it was referencing. And obviously that node group is responsible for those ambient occlusion effects. Now, linking data is fine, for doing renders between software, but with the way I'm doing things, and as a one-person team, I'm not interested in using linked features in Blender. I want everything to be local, especially when I move it onto the render workspace and then have the other render computers rendering locally as well. So to help me find these secret linked things, I have a script here which generates a little report for you when you run it, and it will tell me if there's anything in the file that will probably cause a problem during the render process. So to see the result of this, if I go to Window and then Toggle System Console, now again, actually seeing the console output on different operating systems may, require a different process, but on Windows, you just go to Window, Toggle System Console. I can't say specifically what the process is on Mac or Linux because I don't have that available to test with at the moment. Let me just put that on the side. If I press run the script, you'll see in the info window here, it says ppy.ops.txt.run script. And if I bring back the console, you see we've got linked data report, library, exclusive sculptures, sculptures.blend. That's because I dragged in a Mercury statue earlier. However, no tracked ID types from this library. I did delete the statue. So this gives you some things to look out for. I might always go back into my file data and have a look to see whether that statue is still there. We can see that the linked library here is listed under the file data. So that's a very useful script. Just gives you a quick report you can look at. I also mentioned that I have included my theme in this version as well. So you'll find steel_501, I believe it's called, in the Gumroad files. Also, side note, I should probably put this package on Superhive at some point as well, but for now it's just available on Gumroad. But if you download that steel file, if you go into your app data, roaming, Blender Foundation, again, this may be different depending on the operating system. Blender, find the version you want to install it for, in this case 5.0, go to scripts, go to presets, interface theme, and then you can drag a copy of that file in here. So you see here, steel 501. Then in edit preferences, themes, you should be able to see it under the list. So for example, we can see if I go to Blender Dark, it looks like this. Steel looks like this. And you'll see that there's a bit more of a blue bias. Now I did say it was darker than the Blender Dark theme, but I think the Blender Dark theme has changed since I did the original version. And actually, to be fair, the default values for Steel have changed as well. So I may need to make it even darker now. Ooh. But there are still some areas I need to update. For example, these shader ones are too bright. So maybe I'll update that while I'm here. Thing is, obviously, as Blender versions change, the theme data changes slightly as well. So you need to stay on top of it. Let's turn you down a bit. And I desaturated it slightly. At the end of the day, though, it's all personal preference. I find myself swapping between themes semi-regularly anyway. And in my free add-on Holt tools, which has not been updated in quite a while, we do have a theme hot swapper as well. So you can swap between the different themes that you have and play around with that. So yeah, it's available on Gumroad. Again, it's just a way of supporting me and for me to make my personal files available to you. If you made it this far through the video, put a wrench emoji in the comments. Remember, if you're on Windows, you can press the Windows key and the period key to open an emoji keyboard. But otherwise, I'm going to leave you with a pre-recorded information segment, just letting you know a bit more about what we do here on this channel. Self-promotion time. If you're a Blender artist, whether you're a hobbyist or a professional looking for a way to speed up your studio workflow, then I have a variety of tools available for you. You can see a generalized list on codasol.online/store. If I show an image, this may change over time as new things are added, but generally speaking, there's a variety of add-ons and artistic resources available on Gumroad and Superhive, formerly known as Blender Market. Again, they may be available in more places in the future, but there is both a collection of paid stuff and some free stuff available, especially on the Gumroad, because it is my aim to try and make as much content available for everyone as I can. And that actually ties into our Patreon system, because my Patreon helps fund my work into free community projects. Every month, the amount that my patrons give me is divided down into a number of hours, and those hours are spent making free things for everyone. Oh, I forgot to mention, you can also sign up to the Patreon for free to get a monthly roundup of everything that's new. So why not? Come and join the club. We even have a Discord server. You can find a link to that on codasol.online/links. Patrons get access to an extra channel. Think about it like a hotline to me. Obviously, picking up the products is a massive way to support as well. In fact, the products are the main reason I can keep doing videos like this. So take a look, see if there's anything you find interesting. If not, don't worry. And if there are any free projects you want to see updated, maybe something like EasyBPY or Holt tools, these are categorically things that fit into the Patreon system. So consider supporting there and let me know what you want to see. So have a great day, and I'll see you next time.